Just 3 minutes ago, inside the guarded walls of Buckingham Palace, a decision was revealed that no one saw coming. A quiet announcement whispered first, then echoed across royal corridors, sent shockwaves through generations of tradition. As the name Charlotte surfaced alongside Diana's most sacred jewels, one royal stood frozen in disbelief. Because this wasn't just inheritance, it was a rewriting of history. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. There had been no warning, no careful leaks to the press, no polite hints tucked into society columns or coded remarks during garden parties. The palace, so often compared to a fortress of routine and predictability, had guarded this decision with surgical precision. Senior aides were blindsided. Courtiers who had dedicated decades to memorizing protocol stood speechless. The air inside those historic walls thickened with confusion, as if tradition itself had been caught off balance. Because in the monarchy, surprises are rare, but when they arrive, they carry consequences. And this one carried the weight of a crown's unspoken hierarchy. The silence that followed the announcement was not ordinary silence. It was the kind that hums, the kind that forces people to measure every breath. Eyes shifted, shoulders stiffened, conversations halted mid-sentence. No one dared to be the first to question it aloud, yet disbelief flickered across carefully trained expressions. This was not how things were done. Not with heirlooms. Not with Diana's jewels. There were expectations quietly understood, rarely challenged, that certain treasures would follow certain bloodlines. And yet, in one brief declaration, those invisible lines had been redrawn. At the center of that emotional aftershock stood Princess Beatrice. For a split second, the composure she has mastered over years of public scrutiny faltered. Those who saw her in that moment describe it as something close to stunned paralysis. Not anger, not even protest, just shock. Because the tiaras in question were not mere ornaments locked in velvet cases. They were symbols of proximity, of trust, of legacy. And for years, whispers had suggested that Beatrice, as one of Diana's nieces by marriage into the extended royal fold, carried an unspoken closeness to that glittering inheritance. Whether those whispers were ever grounded in promise no longer mattered. What mattered was that her name was not the one spoken. Instead, it was Charlotte. Young, poised, and still years away from understanding the full gravity of what had just been placed upon her shoulders. A child handed history before she can even comprehend its burden. That, perhaps, is what unsettled the corridors most. Because naming her now was not practical, it was symbolic. It was a statement about the future, about who the monarchy is preparing to elevate in both image and meaning. Diana's private tiara collection is steeped in emotion. Each piece carries memories of triumph and heartbreak, of dazzling public adoration and deeply personal sorrow. They are relics of a princess who reshaped public affection for the crown. And now, those relics are being aligned with a new generation far earlier than anyone anticipated. Almost instantly, murmurs began, carefully phrased, diplomatically cautious, but impossible to suppress. Had protocol been bypassed? Were long-standing understandings quietly discarded? In royal households, there are rules written in ink and others etched only in expectation. This decision seemed to fracture the latter. Some saw bold modernization. Others saw a breach of sacred custom. And beneath the polished surfaces of palace unity, a subtle tension began to coil, tight and unresolved, threatening to surface at any moment. But to understand why this moment hit like a royal earthquake, we must go back to the legacy that made those tiaras more than just jewels. Behind the public glamour of Princess Diana existed a private world few ever saw, one filled with handwritten notes, guarded relationships, and a collection of tiaras never officially catalogued. These weren't just accessories, they were fragments of her identity, her rebellion, and her silent messages to the future. And hidden within them, a legacy that was never meant to follow tradition. Long before headlines crowned her the people's princess, Diana had begun assembling pieces that spoke only to her. Some were gifts, offered in quiet admiration by foreign dignitaries who sensed her loneliness beneath the spotlight. Others were acquired discreetly, through channels that never passed across official palace desks. They did not appear in royal inventories. They were not displayed in formal archives. They existed in a space between privilege and privacy, shielded from the machinery of the institution that both elevated and confined her. That secrecy was deliberate, because these tiaras were not symbols of duty. They were symbols of choice. Each piece carried a story that the public never fully decoded. One was worn after a particularly brutal season of scrutiny, its sharp, modern lines reflecting a woman redefining herself under pressure. Another appeared during a diplomatic visit that marked a turning point in her independence, its delicate design whispering resilience rather than compliance. To the outside world, they shimmered like any other jewels, but to Diana, they were armor. They were punctuation marks in a life constantly narrated by others. And by choosing when and how to wear them, she reclaimed a measure of control in a system that rarely granted it. What made the collection even more powerful was its absence from formal recognition. Palace records remained silent. No press release ever acknowledged their existence. It was as if Diana had carved out a secret chapter in a book the monarchy believed it authored. That silence fed speculation. Some insiders believed she intentionally kept the collection separate so it would not be absorbed into the crown's permanent vaults. Others whispered that she had spoken quietly and emotionally about wanting certain pieces to find their way to a future generation, not necessarily her direct heirs, not bound by rigid succession, but to someone who embodied innocence unburdened by palace expectations. Diana's connection to younger royals was always layered with tenderness. She gravitated toward youth, toward possibility. In private conversations, she often spoke about protecting children from the weight she herself had carried too early. There was something sacred in the way she viewed innocence as a force powerful enough to soften even the coldest corridors of monarchy. And it is within that tenderness that many now search for clues. Because if these tiaras were messages, then they were messages about freedom, about stepping beyond scripts written generations before, about refusing to let tradition silence individuality. Over time, the jewels became less about wealth and more about quiet defiance. They represented a woman who learned, painfully, that survival sometimes requires subtle rebellion. They were not meant to dazzle courtiers. They were meant to endure, and in that endurance lay a question that few dared to voice aloud. Who, in the years to come, would understand what they truly stood for? And yet, if these jewels carried such personal meaning, why did everyone assume they would one day belong to Beatrice? For years, there was an unspoken understanding never confirmed, but deeply believed that Princess Beatrice would one day inherit Diana's hidden treasures. It wasn't written in any will, yet it lived in glances, conversations, and royal expectation. So when her name was suddenly replaced, it didn't just feel like loss, it felt like betrayal. The belief did not emerge from fantasy. It grew slowly, almost invisibly, from proximity and perception. Beatrice had long been seen as orbiting close to Diana's extended emotional legacy, woven into the broader fabric of the royal family that still carried Diana's memory like a fragile heirloom. There were shared appearances, overlapping charitable passions, and moments where older courtiers spoke her name with a tone that implied continuity. In a monarchy built on lineage, such tones matter. Bloodlines define succession. Precedent defines belonging. And history, more often than not, rewards those who remain within its accepted branches. Royal inheritance has always followed a pattern, sometimes rigid, sometimes softened by circumstance, but rarely shattered without warning. Jewels pass from queen to consort, from mother to daughter, from one carefully selected custodian to the next. Even when the rules are unwritten, they are understood. Beatrice, positioned within that ancient web of expectation, may never have been promised anything outright. Yet subtle gestures can feel louder than legal documents. A private remark here, a knowing smile there, an invitation to view a collection others never saw. Over time, suggestion becomes certainty, and certainty becomes emotional investment. That investment is the quietest kind of commitment. It builds over years, unchallenged, because no one thinks to challenge it. Perhaps Beatrice imagined wearing those tiaras not as a display of privilege, but as a continuation of something deeply personal. Diana's jewels were never just about sparkle, they carried memory, defiance, and grace under pressure. To be trusted with them would mean inheriting not just beauty, but meaning. And meaning is powerful currency inside royal walls. It grants identity. It anchors one's place in a story larger than oneself. So when the announcement shifted that imagined future elsewhere, the loss struck at something far more intimate than ownership. How do you grieve what was never officially yours? How do you process the disappearance of a destiny that existed only in shared assumption? That is the psychological fracture at the center of this moment. There is no clause to contest, no public promise to cite, only a silent recalibration of identity. In royal life, where so much is dictated by birth and protocol, even perceived shifts in legacy can feel destabilizing. And beneath that personal shock lies a deeper tension, one that has haunted the monarchy for generations. Tradition demands order. Personal legacy demands choice. Diana herself challenged the balance between the two, often placing heart above hierarchy. If her private collection was indeed meant to escape rigid bloodline rules, then perhaps the assumption surrounding Beatrice was always fragile. Perhaps it rested on the old belief that history must repeat itself neatly, passing treasures along predictable paths. But legacies shaped by rebellion rarely move predictably. They twist, they defy, they choose unexpected custodians. And as whispers continue to ripple through palace corridors, one truth begins to settle with unsettling clarity. This was not a last-minute upheaval born of impulse. But what no one realized was that the decision had already been made long before today, and it involved a secret few ever knew. Buried within private archives and whispered among only the most trusted insiders lies a possibility that changes everything. What if Diana herself made this decision? Not publicly, not formally, but through a hidden directive meant to bypass royal tradition. A wish so unconventional, so bold, that it could only be revealed at the perfect moment, a moment that just arrived. For years, rumors have circled like shadows around a sealed envelope said to exist beyond official registries. Not a legal amendment, not a codicil stamped with palace approval. Something quieter, more personal. A letter, perhaps. A handwritten instruction entrusted to someone whose loyalty was to Diana the woman, not the monarchy she married into. According to those who claim knowledge of it, the message was simple but radical. Her private jewels were to belong to the future, not the expected. It was a phrase loaded with intention. It rejected predictability. It rejected hierarchy. And in doing so, it planted a seed of disruption that would only bloom when the time was right. Diana understood symbolism better than most. She knew that legacy was not just about who inherits, but about what that inheritance communicates. To choose youth over established order would be to make a statement louder than any speech. Princess Charlotte, still untouched by palace politics, represents something Diana cherished fiercely: innocence uncorrupted by expectation. In that innocence lies possibility. And perhaps Diana believed that her jewels, born from personal reinvention and silent rebellion, should rest with someone who embodies a new chapter rather than an extension of the old one. If such a directive exists, it would have required guardians, trusted confidants willing to protect it from premature exposure, friends who understood that timing, in royal life, is everything. Some speculate that only a handful of individuals were ever aware of the instruction people who watched carefully as years unfolded, waiting for a moment when its revelation would not only honor Diana's wishes but reshape the monarchy's narrative. That moment, it seems, has now arrived with stunning force. Why now? That question hangs heavily in the air. The monarchy stands at a crossroads, balancing public scrutiny with internal evolution. Choosing this moment to unveil Diana's alleged wish suggests calculation. It suggests that the decision was not impulsive, nor purely sentimental. It was strategic. By revealing that the tiaras were always meant for someone representing the monarchy's future, not its past, the institution shields itself from accusations of favoritism, while simultaneously invoking Diana's enduring influence. It transforms controversy into destiny. But destiny, when it disrupts tradition, does not arrive gently. If this was indeed Diana's design, it was daring. It sidestepped bloodline assumptions. It ignored quiet expectations that had settled over Beatrice for years. It challenged the monarchy's reliance on predictable succession patterns. And in doing so, it forced the palace to confront a difficult truth. Diana's legacy was never meant to be neatly folded into existing structures. It was meant to question them, to stretch them, to unsettle them. The emotional impact of that possibility is profound. For Beatrice, It reframes perceived loss as part of a larger narrative she may never have been meant to inherit. For Charlotte, it casts her not merely as a beneficiary, but as a symbol chosen long before she could understand why. And for the monarchy itself, it raises an uncomfortable realization that even in absence, Diana continues to shape decisions in ways that bypass protocol and pierce through tradition. If this hidden directive is real, then today's announcement was not a surprise at all. It was the culmination of a promise made in private, waiting patiently for its appointed hour. And with its revelation, the carefully balanced architecture of royal expectation begins to tremble. And as this hidden wish came to light, the palace itself began to fracture under the weight of its consequences. The announcement may have been brief, but its aftermath was anything but. Behind closed doors, reactions ranged from stunned silence to quiet outrage. Some saw it as a beautiful tribute, others as a dangerous precedent. And at the center of it all stood Beatrice, caught between composure and heartbreak as the palace watched her every move. In the hours that followed, the corridors of power filled with hushed strategy sessions and carefully chosen words. Senior advisors, trained to anticipate scandal before it sparks, found themselves navigating something far more delicate than public backlash. This was internal, personal, emotional. A tribute to Diana, yes, but also a ripple that disturbed the monarchy's fragile balance. For some family members, the decision felt poetic, almost redemptive. They spoke softly of honoring a mother's spirit and embracing the future she envisioned. But others were less romantic. They saw risk. They saw tradition bending under pressure. And in a system built on continuity, even the slightest bend can feel like a fracture. Beatrice became the quiet focal point of that tension. She did not lash out. She did not retreat. Instead, she did what royals are trained to do. She held her posture, measured her words, and allowed no public crack to form. But those who know her well sensed the shift. A tightening in her tone. A pause that lingered half a second too long. The kind of restraint that speaks louder than protest. Because heartbreak, when disciplined by protocol, becomes almost invisible. Almost. Around her, alliances subtly recalibrated. Some cousins expressed solidarity in private conversations, their loyalty shaped by shared upbringing and mutual understanding of royal expectation. Others gravitated toward the narrative of modernization, aligning themselves with the symbolic power of Diana's alleged wish. These were not dramatic confrontations. They were quieter than that. A change in seating at a dinner, a delayed reply, a recalculated invitation. In royal life, loyalty is rarely declared, it is demonstrated in nuance. What emerged was not open conflict, but generational unease. The older guard, steeped in hierarchy and historical order, viewed the move with skepticism. To them, inheritance has structure, meaning follows bloodline. Stability comes from predictability. The younger generation, however, lives in a world reshaped by Diana's legacy, a world that values emotional resonance over rigid rule. For them, choosing Charlotte was not disruption, it was evolution. And between those two perspectives stretched a tension that could not be resolved in a single afternoon. As days passed, another realization began to take hold within palace walls. This was not just about tiaras. It was about narrative control, about who defines legacy. If Diana's private, while formal or whispered, can alter expectations decades later, then the monarchy is no longer the sole architect of its own continuity. That thought unsettled more than a few seasoned courtiers, because once tradition is challenged successfully, it becomes easier to challenge again. Beatrice, meanwhile, found herself navigating a delicate emotional landscape, publicly supportive, privately reflective, forced to reconcile years of perceived closeness with a reality that had shifted overnight. There is a particular pain in losing something intangible, something built on assumption rather than assurance. And yet, she remained composed, aware that every expression, every gesture would be interpreted as a signal of unity or dissent. The palace, outwardly serene, carried an undercurrent of unresolved strain. Decisions like this do not fade quietly. They linger, they shape conversations, they influence futures. And as the institution absorbed the weight of what had just transpired, one truth became impossible to ignore. The real storm had not yet arrived. But outside the palace walls, the reaction was even more explosive, and impossible to contain. Within minutes, the news spread beyond palace gates, igniting a storm across the world. Social media erupted. Headlines clashed. And suddenly, what began as a private royal decision became a global debate. Was this a heartfelt tribute to Diana, or a calculated move that broke centuries of tradition? The reaction was immediate and unfiltered. Across platforms, voices collided in real time. Some called it poetic justice, a long-awaited honoring of Diana's independent spirit, now entrusted to a young princess who represents renewal. Others were less forgiving, accusing the palace of manipulating emotion to disguise disruption. Hashtags surged. Comment threads turned into battlegrounds. The monarchy, once shielded by ceremony and distance, found itself pulled into the raw immediacy of public opinion. And in that digital arena, tradition holds far less authority than feeling. Media outlets amplified the divide. One headline declared the decision historic, praising its symbolism as a bridge between past and future. Another labeled it controversial, questioning whether the monarchy had quietly rewritten its own rules under the cover of sentiment. Analysts debated whether this was evolution or instability. Commentators dissected every angle: Diana's rumored directive, Charlotte's youth, Beatrice's composure. The story refused to remain simple. It became layered, reflective of broader cultural tensions about inheritance, fairness, and who gets to define legacy. At the center of it all was Diana, once again commanding global fascination decades after her passing. Her name trended. Old interviews resurfaced. Memories flooded timelines. For many, this decision reopened an emotional chapter that had never fully closed. Diana was not just a royal figure, she was a symbol of vulnerability within power. And now, the idea that her private wishes might have shaped a modern royal shift felt both intimate and revolutionary. It reminded the public that monarchy is not merely structure, it is story. And Diana's story still moves hearts in ways few institutions can control. Sympathy for Beatrice began to swell as well. Observers noted her restraint, her dignified silence in the face of what appeared to be a personal blow. Opinion pieces framed her as the overlooked figure in a drama centered on legacy. That narrative resonated, because in every public triumph, there is often a quieter cost. The contrast between Charlotte's symbolic elevation and Beatrice's quiet recalibration became a focal point for empathy. Two young women, bound by blood and expectation, now positioned on opposite ends of a decision neither publicly orchestrated, but beyond individual. Emotion, something larger, was unfolding. The symbolism of choosing Charlotte was impossible to ignore. It suggested a monarchy leaning forward rather than backward, a shift from predictable lineage to intentional messaging. In a world questioning inherited power, aligning Diana's private treasures with a child of the future felt like a deliberate gesture. Not just about jewels, but about direction, about narrative, about survival. And as commentators widened the lens, the conversation expanded beyond royal gossip into cultural reflection. What does it mean to honor legacy? Must tradition remain untouched to retain legitimacy? Or can institutions evolve without losing their foundation? The debate became less about tiaras and more about identity. The monarchy, once defined by rigid continuity, now stood at the center of a dialogue about transformation. The story was no longer confined to palace corridors. It had become a global mirror, reflecting society's complicated relationship with history and change. Every opinion adds pressure. Every headline intensified scrutiny. And as the noise grew louder, one realization began to settle beneath the chaos. This moment would not simply pass as another royal footnote. It marked a pivot. Yet amid all the noise, one question refused to fade. What does this mean for the future of the monarchy itself? This wasn't just about jewels, it was about direction. For centuries, the monarchy has thrived on tradition, hierarchy, and predictability. But with one unexpected decision, those foundations suddenly feel less certain. Because if Diana's legacy can bypass the expected, what else might follow? At its core, this moment signals a subtle but undeniable shift. Royal inheritance has long functioned like clockwork: titles, estates, and treasures moving along predetermined lines that reinforce stability. Predictability has been its strength. The public may debate personalities, but the structure itself rarely surprises. And yet, by placing Diana's deeply personal collection into the symbolic hands of Princess Charlotte, that structure has been nudged off its axis. Not shattered, not dismantled, but undeniably altered. A private legacy has interrupted a public pattern. Charlotte's elevation within this narrative is not about age or immediate responsibility. It is about imagery. She now stands as the living bridge between Diana's emotional resonance and the monarchy's next era. That association carries weight far beyond adornment. It positions her, intentionally or not, as a future icon shaped by compassion rather than protocol alone. The monarchy understands symbolism as a language. And in choosing Charlotte, it has spoken fluently to a generation that values authenticity over rigidity. But symbolism, once introduced, reshapes expectation. Inevitably, questions begin to surface. If this collection could move outside assumed lines, what of other personal assets? What of estates, patronages, heirlooms steeped in individual meaning rather than institutional ownership? The monarchy may insist that this case is unique, rooted in Diana's singular story. Yet precedent has a quiet power. It lingers. It becomes reference. And in a system built on tradition, even one deviation can invite reconsideration of the entire framework. The ripple effects extend beyond property. Relationships within the royal circle now exist in a slightly altered atmosphere. Perception matters as much as reality. Some may feel empowered by the monarchy's willingness to adapt, interpreting it as a sign of responsiveness to public sentiment. Others may feel unsettled, wondering whether their own roles could be reframed by unseen directives or emotional narratives yet to emerge. Stability, once unquestioned, now carries an asterisk. At the same time, the monarchy's adaptation to modern emotional storytelling cannot be ignored. Institutions survive not by resisting change outright, but by absorbing it carefully. Diana's enduring influence offers a powerful bridge between past and present. By aligning her private legacy with Charlotte, the palace may be signaling a broader evolution, one where personal meaning carries as much influence as formal rank. It is a delicate balancing act. Lean too far into sentiment, and tradition weakens. Cling too tightly to hierarchy, and relevance fades. Speculation naturally intensifies. Could this decision foreshadow deeper adjustments in how the monarchy approaches inheritance, representation, or succession narratives? Might we see a gradual reshaping of how royal figures are positioned not strictly by order of birth, but by emotional resonance and public connection? Such possibilities remain unspoken, yet they hover over the institution like distant thunder. Change within monarchy rarely arrives loudly. It gathers quietly, step by measured step. And still, beneath the analysis and the forecasts, one truth remains clear. This moment has introduced uncertainty into a system that depends on certainty. That uncertainty is not necessarily weakness. It can be transformation. But transformation demands careful navigation. The monarchy now stands at an intersection where symbolism, sentiment, and structure converge. The path chosen from here will define more than who wears a tiara. It will shape how legacy itself is understood. And still, through all the speculation and uncertainty, the emotional core of this story remains deeply personal. Away from the cameras, away from the headlines, there is a quieter story unfolding, one of personal loss, reflection, and perhaps even transformation. For Beatrice, this moment isn't about headlines or history. It's about something far more human, coming to terms with a legacy that slipped through her fingers and finding meaning beyond it. In public, she remains steady, measured. Her words carefully chosen, her posture unwavering. That is the discipline of royalty, to absorb shock without spectacle. But composure is not the same as indifference. Behind that controlled exterior lies the slow, complicated work of processing disappointment that cannot be openly mourned. Because how do you grieve a possibility? How do you explain the ache of something you were never formally promised, yet deeply believed would one day be yours? That is the silent tension she must navigate now. For years, the imagined future of carrying Diana's private jewels may have formed part of her internal narrative, not as entitlement, but as continuity. A way to honor a woman whose story reshaped the monarchy and whose emotional legacy still lingers in every corridor. To be aligned with that legacy would have meant stepping into something luminous and historic. And when that alignment shifted, it left behind more than surprise. It left questions about identity. about place, about how one redefines purpose when an unspoken expectation dissolves overnight. There is a particular weight in what could have been. It lingers in quiet moments. It echoes in reflection. For Beatrice, that weight must coexist with grace. She cannot publicly contest destiny. She cannot retreat into visible resentment. Instead, she must confront the deeper realization that legacy is not confined to material inheritance. Diana's influence was never solely contained in jewels. It lived in compassion, in courage, in challenging norms. Perhaps the true inheritance was never about adornment at all. That understanding does not erase the sting. It transforms it. Slowly, privately. In the absence of public drama, growth often takes root. Beatrice now stands at a crossroads of her own, not defined by what she did not receive, but by what she chooses to embody moving forward. Resilience is rarely announced. It is practiced. And in this moment, she has the opportunity to craft a narrative independent of expectation, one grounded not in possession, but in purpose. The contrast between external perception and internal reality remains striking. To the world, this story is about redistribution, symbolism, and royal evolution. To her, it may feel like a quiet recalibration of self. There is strength in that recalibration. Strength in recognizing that identity cannot hinge on a single outcome. In royal life, where roles are often assigned by birth and tradition, carving out personal meaning becomes an act of subtle defiance. Over time, the emotional sharpness of this moment may soften. The sense of loss may give way to clarity, because sometimes what slips through our fingers forces us to reach for something more authentic, something chosen rather than assumed. And perhaps, in stepping back from Diana's jewels, Beatrice steps forward into a version of herself untethered from imagined destiny. But even as she processes that private transformation, the larger story continues to move. Legacies do not pause for reflection. They shift hands. They evolve. They begin again in unexpected ways. But as one chapter closes, another begins with a young princess now carrying a legacy unlike any before her. In the end, all eyes turn to Charlotte, a child now at the center of a legacy she may not yet fully understand. But one day, she will. Because these tiaras are more than jewels, they are stories, sacrifices, and symbols of a woman who changed the monarchy forever. And now, that story continues. For now, Charlotte remains simply a young princess, shielded from the weight of what has been placed upon her name. Yet history has a quiet way of shaping those born into its current. Diana's legacy was never static. It moved hearts, unsettled institutions, and redefined what compassion could look like within a crown. By aligning that legacy with Charlotte, the monarchy has not just passed down adornment, it has entrusted her with emotional resonance that still echoes across generations. That resonance carries expectation, curiosity, and something close to destiny. There is poetry in the way history repeats itself, not in identical patterns, but in spirit. Diana once entered the royal stage as a figure of youth and promise, carrying hope that transcended protocol. Now, decades later, another young royal stands connected to her through symbolism rather than memory. The parallels are impossible to ignore, yet Charlotte's path will not mirror the past. It will evolve from it. And in that evolution lies the true power of legacy, not replication, but renewal. The public fascination is already taking shape. Observers imagine future state occasions, future milestones, future moments when those tiaras might reappear under new light. Each imagined scene becomes part of a broader narrative about continuity and change. But beyond spectacle, there is deeper meaning. These jewels represent resilience born from scrutiny, strength forged through vulnerability. They embody a woman who reshaped the monarchy by daring to be human within it. And now, that humanity has been symbolically entrusted to the next generation. What makes this moment so compelling is not the sparkle of inheritance, but the transfer of story. Wealth can be counted. Titles can be recorded. But meaning, that is something else entirely. Meaning must be carried. It must be understood. One day, Charlotte will learn not only the history of the jewels, but the emotional battles intertwined with them. She will discover that legacy is not comfort, it is responsibility. And perhaps, in that understanding, she will shape it further, adding her own chapter to a narrative already rich with complexity. Diana's influence endures because it was never confined to a throne. It lived in connection, in courage, in challenging expectation. That influence now threads its way into Charlotte's future, quietly guiding a story still being written. Around her, the monarchy continues to adapt, to respond, to evolve. But beneath the structural shifts and public debate, there is a simple truth unfolding in real time. Legacy is alive. It moves. It chooses. It surprises. And as Charlotte grows, so too will the significance of this decision. What began as controversy may one day be remembered as turning point. A moment when the monarchy leaned into emotion rather than away from it. A moment when history did not cling to predictability, but embraced possibility. Because in the world of royalty, legacies are never truly lost. They simply find new heirs. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.